I want to introduce Colin and Hayley Hubbard from Ystalyfera. Can you say that word? Yeah. Ystalyfera, which is in West Wales. They haven't brought their baby with them, but they've got a lovely son and another son who's 18 years old, is he? 16 years old. Come and tell us your story. Let's give them a round of applause, shall we?
Thank you. We're going to tag team a little bit. It's fantastic to be with you and just such a sense of God's presence here. At one point, I didn't think I was going to be able to speak because I just felt like bawling my eyes out. When Jesus is in the room, he just touches that place in our soul that no one else can reach, you know? How can you walk into a building like this and then all of a sudden be transported to a heavenly realm where Jesus' presence is? And he heals and he restores and he brings peace. You know, he's such an incredible, incredible God. And so I'm going to share a bit of my story. Then Colin's going to share a bit of his. And then he's going to just share a little bit about how we met. So I was brought up in church from about the age of 6, and I remember going to church and I remember really loving Jesus. One of the things that moved me here this morning was seeing some of these young people worshipping God. It just touched my heart because I remember what it was at that young age to really love Jesus. I remember with that simple faith, I knew that Jesus had died for me on the cross. I knew that he loved me, and I just had this sense of peace and love and protection because I knew that God was in my life. My mum and dad had a real heart for people, and so when I was probably about 8, we were asked by our church to take over a YMCA. And so we left our family home and we moved into a YMCA building, and we lived on the middle floor. And we took homeless people in and they lived upstairs. But during this time, my mum and dad went through a really difficult patch in their marriage. And when I look back at it now, I think the enemy was just out to rob what God was doing. But it really rocked our family. And through that situation, we ended up leaving church completely. So I'd gone from being in this really safe, protective, sense of God's love, peace and protection to all of a sudden just feeling very broken, very fearful and not really knowing what was going on. So I rebelled, and about the age of 12, I went straight from singing, dancing, loving Jesus, and I found the roughest council estate there was nearby, and I made it my second home. And all that went on there was taking drugs, stealing cars, and doing anything that was just criminal. So from the age of 12, I was experimenting with drugs. I was smoking cannabis, I was taking some other tablets and things like that. But at the age of 15, I'd say I became really addicted. I started taking speed, and speed gives you a lot of energy and it makes you feel happy, and it kind of masks how you really feel. And so how I really felt was depressed, lost, broken, disillusioned with life, and I got bullied in school and things like that. And so when I took this drug, it masked all of those feelings and it made me feel like I was having a good time. But where some of my friends could just take it and leave it, I wanted to feel good all of the time, and I never wanted to come down from the high. So I quickly just started taking this drug so frequently that it just got a hold of my life in a big way. My parents still wanted to support people, and so they became foster carers. And, it's a good thing, it's an amazing thing for them to do, but unfortunately, I resented them for doing it. I felt that I needed them. I felt like I was going through so much at school and different things like that. And so what I did then was pushed my family away completely and just wanted this group of friends to now be my family. And so all of the dysfunction that they had in their families became my dysfunction. And I thought that I'd found, what I really wanted was to live by my own rules, to do my own thing. And so at about the age of 17, I'd started getting in trouble with the police. So the social services turned up at my family home and basically said to my parents, either you're going to have to stop fostering, or Hayley's going to need to move out because we can't have this behaviour and the foster kids obviously being here. So for me, I just thought, this is my ticket out of here. So I said, no, that's fine. You carry on fostering. I'm going to get my own place. And as you can imagine, a vulnerable 17-year-old already living in a chaotic life, that flat became nothing but a drug den. I had all sorts of people who could come back there, and my drug taking just went to a whole new level. So I was 17, I was living in this flat. It was the sort of place where you didn't use a key to get through the door, you just barged it with your elbow. It was like just a knock lock, you know? And all sorts of people would be coming in. I'd have people overdosing out the back garden. It was just absolute chaos. And at one point, I had taken this concoction of drugs. I had a guy who lived upstairs who was on mental health medication. And one day I couldn't get any drugs from anywhere. So I said to him, I knocked on his door and I said, have you got any tablets for me? Didn't know what they were. And he said, yeah, I've got a few. So he handed me a few and I took them. Then I found an ecstasy pill on the floor in my flat. So I took that as well. And I went to bed. Pretty random thing to do, but that's what I did. That was just the life I was in. And when I woke up, I was completely paralyzed. I couldn't move, I couldn't speak, all I could do was just grunt. My mum had washed her hands of me because I had been so aggressive towards her, trying to get money, that she just said, that's it, Hale, you know, I can't have this anymore. I was taking all my frustration out on her. And so I woke up in my flat thinking, what am I going to do? I need to ring my mum. So I rang my mum, and all I could do was grunt on the phone. She obviously knew it was me and quickly jumped in the car and came to get me in my flat. I went back to my mum's house that night and I stayed there for 2 weeks. I slept for 5 days. And for a long time, I slowly began to speak. My speech was really slow, getting back to normal. But during these 5 days of sleeping, I had 2 significant dreams. One was about the dangers of taking drugs, and that if I carried on taking these drugs, I was going to die. And the second was, I had a dream that everybody had gone to be with Jesus and I'd been left behind. And I was with a group of people and we'd all been left behind, and we could see everyone that had gone to this new place where Jesus was, but we couldn't get there. And we were trying to build a catapult and we were trying to catapult ourselves, but every time we got near, we just got pulled all the way back. And I woke up knowing that God was trying to get me to see that I was going down the wrong path. I wish that was the end of the story, but it isn't. The chaos continued. I straightened up a little bit at that time, but then my lifestyle, my friendship group was just those type of people, and I just carried on. So I was living now back at home with my family, but my drug addiction was still carrying on. But instead of taking some of the drugs that I felt were dangerous, I stopped taking them. A lot of my friends had now moved on to smoking heroin, a drug I said I'd never do because one of my friends when I was 15 had died of an overdose, and in loyalty to his memory I said I'd never touch that drug. But when you're in the chaos, your loyalties just seem to disappear. So my friends had moved on to smoking heroin, and so one day I asked my friend, could I try it? She gave me a go of smoking this heroin this one day, and then the rest is history. My life spiraled from one level of chaos to a complete other level of chaos. I was in a flat one day, and I was with a group of people, and we'd scored some heroin. We were really excited because we knew it was strong stuff. My next memory is waking up in the flat with a crew of ambulance workers around me. I'd been put on the floor, water had been tipped over me, an ambulance crew had had to inject me with adrenaline because I'd overdosed on this heroin. I remember being in this flat and this reality hit me that I just nearly died and I have no idea where I'm going. I remember having my arm around the ambulance man's shoulders and was just crying and saying sorry for wasting his time, because I was so low at that point. I just believed that my life was worthless. I just believed that my life had no value, and that basically this ambulance man could be off saving someone who deserved to be saved. I went to church for the first time in 10 years after that happened, because I knew that I needed to find God. I knew I needed God in my life. And I remember coming into the church service, and like we just had worship just now, I just sobbed and sobbed and sobbed. I could not pick my face up because the snot was running down to the ground and my eyes were just bawling, crying. And I felt uncontrollable because of the brokenness that was in my life. But because of the feeling of being uncontrollable in God's presence and the shame and the guilt that I felt, I swore I'd never step foot in a church again. So I left church at that point, and I got onto a methadone script, and I tried to straighten my life out with, everything the world has got to offer to kind of help you out. But again, the process of my life was just still absolute chaos. So during this time, I did a prison sentence for a violent crime. And again, just a lot of shame and guilt that came on the family through that. And I ended up continuing to use speed. So I'd stopped using heroin, but I was back using speed, and I was injecting speed. And I'll fast forward a bit, but I'm about 21 at this time. And the amount of speed that I was using is nobody's business. It completely controlled my mind. It had now become a force that was pushing me to do something rather than a desire to do it. And I remember, taking this drug, and I wouldn't go out during the day because I was terrified of people and I was ashamed of who I was. So I would walk the streets at night. Many of you probably know the story of Legion in the Bible. Well, think of Legion, you'll see me. That was me walking the streets of the valleys in the middle of the night, absolutely crazed with drugs and, just absolute chaos in my mind. I used to walk the streets and I used to collect bits of rubbish off the ground. I started thinking that if someone saw me doing this, they'll think I'm crazy. Of course I was. So I thought, I'm going to carry a little plastic carrier bag with me, and then people will think I've actually found something. And so in the middle of the night, walking around with nobody else about, I would look like I'd found something on the floor and then put it in the bag. And I'd take it home to see if I'd found anything valuable. And one night I was walking home and I hadn't found anything this particular night. I would walk so slow because I was afraid of missing any part of the road in case I missed something. Absolute crazy. And I was walking home one night, and I remember walking home with my eyes closed because my body was exhausted just from days being awake and walking. And I was walking with my eyes closed down this road, and I thought, I haven't found anything tonight. And then I looked down and I saw a £5 note floating on the puddle. I thought, winner. So I picked up this £5 note, and as I picked it up, I heard a car screech away. And instantly the thought came into my mind, somebody has got a plot out against me, and they've planted that £5 note there because they knew I would pick it up, and they've put a skin disease on it. And from that point onwards, I was convinced that I'd caught this skin disease. So, again, picture Legion. He cut himself with rocks. I would scrape my arms till they were bleeding because I could feel these bugs under my skin. I could feel them running in my nose, in my ears, in my throat. My whole hairline I had picked, so it was bleeding all across there. I was so tormented by what was going on, which I came to realize was a psychotic episode. I was so tormented by this sense of having this skin disease. I would be at the doctor's 3-4 times a week just crying, saying, please, please help me, help me. They sent me to a psychiatrist, and I remember being there, and the psychiatrist said, are you hearing voices? Are you seeing things? Blah, blah. And I was saying, yeah. And so he offered me medication. But by this point in my life, I'd had medication up to there, and I didn't want just another pill that was going to make me worse rather than better. So I was 21 and I was on my knees in my bedroom at my mum's home, and this revelation hit me. Hayley, you've lost your mind. I had a complete nervous breakdown and I lay in bed for months. I blocked out the sun. I was in an attic bedroom. I blocked out the sun with a towel so that no daylight could come in. And I lay in that bed day after day, week after week, in complete darkness and despair. During this time, and I'll be bringing it to an end in a minute to give Colin plenty of time, but during this time, the Holy Spirit reminded me of this Jesus movie I had in my bottom drawer. It was the Jesus movie from the Gospel of Luke, if any of you have seen it. That's my Jesus. Whenever I watch it, I'm like, that's my Jesus. And I started to watch this film, and the tracking was out because it was so old. You know, DVDs were out by this time. But I watched this video, and I would watch it obsessively over and over and over again. I watched it so much that I actually knew the movie word by word. And I watched it, and as I started to see this story, the sinful woman who ran to the feet of Jesus, and she poured out her pain, and she left with peace, I knew there was hope for me. When I saw the story of Legion, crazed and cutting himself with rocks, the people were afraid of him. People were afraid of me because they would cross the road if they saw me. And I could see that Legion had encountered Jesus, and he was left in his right mind, and all he wanted to do was follow Jesus. I knew that there was hope for me. And when I saw Jesus go to that cross and he said, "It is finished," I knew that there was a hope that I could be free from the life that I was bound in. So from that point, I decided to make a decision to go into a Christian rehab called Teen Challenge. And while I was there, I encountered God's love, his power and his presence, and he completely transformed my life. It wasn't instant. It was a process of miracles. One after another, he took my stony heart and he made it a heart of flesh. He took my broken mind and he gave me a sound mind. That's what Jesus can do in any life, in any one of our lives. That's the power of God at work in the earth. So I went to the Teen Challenge program. I had a heart for missions. One of the things I knew was, if God has set me free, then it's not for my own benefit, right? He set me free to go and declare to others that they too can be set free. And so I knew my life wasn't my own. I wanted to live for him. And so I went to travel with an evangelist called Marilyn Harry, and we went to other nations, and I shared my story around the world and all over the UK, and I was just flying, loving Jesus. And then I knew in my heart I wanted to give back to the ministry that that I'd been through, and so I went back to work for Teen Challenge. I worked there for 8 years. That's why I met my friend Lucy at the back there. I've known Lucy for some years now. I love Lucy. She's a good friend. Love you, Luce. And so I went back and I served in the ministry there in Hope House. And then when I knew it was time to move on, I went to university because I really messed up my schoolwork. I didn't do good. And some people said, did you want a career? And I was like, no, I just wanted to do it for me. And so I went to university. I did a degree in social care. And passed with a distinction, which I just think is a miracle after the rubbish schooling that I'd had, and went on to serve the Lord. So I went down to Gilead then, and I gave a year to Gilead. Some of you might know of Gilead Ministries as well, another ministry working with people in addiction. Served there, and came back then to Ustragunnice. I'm just praying about what the Lord wants to do in my life. And I'm going to hand over to Colin now, and then the story will come together from there.
Hello all. So my story is somewhat different to Hayley's, and I'm not so well practiced, so I've got mine written down. So I was brought up in Essex in a Christian family. And we attended church every Sunday, which was a big part of our lives. And at 21 years old, I married a girl from the same church. But around the time that we got married, because we were offended by the church, we actually left. And after leaving, we never found another church to go to, so we stopped attending altogether. Soon my faith started to drift. And I really started to question the things that I believed. and I become worldly in mind. And the marriage was never Christ-centred. We never prayed. We never read the Bible together. We never really spoke about God at all. Things in the marriage became strained as we no longer had these biblical foundations. Of course, we had parents that we could have turned to for wisdom and support, but I was stubborn in my own mind and often didn't understand how I felt. And as time passed, our hearts grew colder, and in 2012, after 8 years of marriage and a 2-year-old son, we separated and got divorced. I was 29 years old. I didn't believe in God anymore. I'd become an agnostic, divorced, so I decided to try and enjoy the life the way all my friends had. So I started going out drinking, clubbing, bouncing around in different relationships and letting the cycle repeat. I did this for a few years, but after realising this didn't bring me much satisfaction, I started to look for a more stable life and relationship. I then settled into a relationship with basically the wrong girl, and although I knew that early on, I continued against my own judgment. She suffered in her mind, and I felt much rejection, something that I was able to relate to, so I didn't feel it right to leave. Unfortunately, I wouldn't be able to help her in her situation, and eventually what happened was I myself came down. I couldn't have been in a worse relationship. And knowing I couldn't leave her due to her own mind, this led my own mental health spiralling, and I fell into depression. I gave up smoking because I used to be a heavy smoker. It wasn't planned, just woke up one morning and decided to quit. And I now know that that was miraculous because quitting was so effortless at that time. But sadly, after quitting, I'd become unwell. I developed a cough, and it wasn't like your normal cough. You know, I would cough and cough and cough, and then I would be sick, and then I would carry on coughing. And it was a real difficult time for me. And it was worse at night. When laying down, it would intensify, and I'd find that nights become a torment as I was sleep deprived. I used to sit there and wonder, where did my life go so wrong? So with this broken relationship and being so unwell, I decided that the only way out of this living hell that I was in was to stop living altogether. So I became suicidal. My life was wrecked, and I thought it was too late to come back from that, and there was no point in carrying on. So on the 25th of April, 2021, the day came for me to take my life. And everything was planned. I knew exactly what I was doing and in what order I was going to be doing it. But it's kind of funny, really, because as I was planning or writing this testimony, I was thinking about that. I was preparing myself for death, but equally the Lord was also preparing me for death, just not in the physical sense. He was bringing me to a place where death would be brought to the things that had for many years kept me from him, including my stubbornness and my ways. It was a trial that I had to walk through. It was a tough trial, but it was necessary for the revelation that came. On that day, I had an encounter with God. Now, just to put that into context, I'd been out of the church for the best part of 20 years. I didn't believe in God, I didn't know God, and I didn't trust God. I wasn't asking for him, I wasn't looking for him, and I wasn't interested in knowing him. But needless to say, God met me anyway, even in my disbelief. Well, following that encounter, I broke down and I started to cry out to God. God, who are you? I don't know who you are. Are you the God of the Christians? Are you the God of the Muslims? Maybe you're the God of the Hindus. I don't believe in Jesus. I don't believe in the Bible. Who are you, God? Reveal yourself to me. Instantly, in that moment, all the depression and the darkness had fallen away, and I was filled with this weird, happy feeling, which I later learnt was joy. I knew something had touched me, but I needed to know more. Being that I rejected Jesus, I didn't instantly accept the Bible or the narrative that I'd been brought up with. I questioned the Lord. Who was he, and what religion leads to him? I thought maybe all religions did, but the Lord would start to reveal himself to me, and over several months he would show me the path to follow. Roughly 6 months after this event, I had another revelation, and I accepted Jesus into my life, as I came to learn that Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life, and no one comes to the Father except through him. There were so many revelations and experiences that happened during that time, which I can't really cover today. But eventually God led me to join a church an hour from where I was living. There I was discipled, encouraged, edified, strengthened, supported for all the challenges of those days, and believe me, there were a few. And the Lord brought me out of the chaotic relationship that I was in. I only got through that time because of the continued support and encouragement by the members of that church, not to mention God's wonderful grace and several prophetic words, including one word from one member saying, "In the year of 2022, keep your eyes focused on Jesus," a word that became very profound. Well, as I fast forward to the August of 2022, I went on a trip to North Wales to reconnect myself with God and to retread some old footsteps. And whilst on that trip, as I was seeking the Lord, he brought me to a place of reflection, a time to rediscover myself, not to mention a time for some correction and healing. I was also talking to the Lord regarding my broken relationships and this broken marriage, by only God's wisdom alone, turned out to be the 18th year anniversary whilst I was actually in Wales, which God then started to address. As the Lord showed me a simple truth, which I pray you will hold steadfast today. The marriage failed because it was never centred on Jesus Christ. I then joined a Christian dating app called Salt with the intention to make friends. And this is where I had my first introduction to Hayley. Now, Hayley will second this. Signing up to a Christian dating app almost felt like we were cheating God out of his God-divine right to bring the right introduction along. But there was kind of a strange prompting to do so, and within a week of us both signing up, we had our introduction. We both created our profiles within days of each other. Hayley had come across my profile and noticed I'd referred to a couple of American worship leaders, Jonathan and Melissa Helser. So the ice was broken as we discussed this amazing worship duo. I would say I'm actually going to see them perform this weekend live at David's tent. And Hayley was surprised to hear this because she too was attending that same event. Well, there was no plans to meet other than maybe see you there. Now, David's tent, he gets approximately 10,000 visitors over the weekend, so I wasn't expecting us to bump in, and I was kind of, to be honest, hoping that we didn't, because I wasn't in a great place and struggling in my mind. But again, by God's wisdom, as one of the worship sets finished on a Sunday afternoon, I was struggling in my mind, having an arm wrestle with God about, would you believe it, a future wife. Knowing this was the year to keep my eyes focused on Jesus, yet asking him and saying that I couldn't fulfill the call on my life without the right, correct wife. As the set ended, I stood up ready to leave, and as I marched ahead of my friends in my annoyance with God, I stopped in my tracks to look back to see where my friends were. It would so happen that I stopped in my tracks, standing right in front of Hayley. There was me arguing with God, saying, "Where is my wife?" When Hayley would tap me on the shoulder and say, "Hi, it's me, Hayley." Slightly startled, we exchanged some pleasantries, and then I made haste. There was an attempt to meet again by the fire, but I was a no-show. Well, to cut a long story short, I felt really convicted by the Holy Spirit the following day, so I reached out to Hayley and wished her a safe journey home and maybe see her next year. But this would spark a proper dialogue between us, which we'd previously missed, and that evening we ended up calling on the phone and speaking for 3 hours. The days went by and we began to speak and message one another a lot, keeping all things friendly and without intention, till one day Hayley mentioned the key phrase, relationship centred on Christ, which is a phrase that God had been speaking to me about. I remember at the end of that call asking the Lord, is there to be more than a friendship between us? Keeping in mind I was living in Norfolk at this time, and Hayley was in South Wales, so 250 miles apart. I said to the Lord, if there's to be more than a friendship here, we should have Christian connections. And initially there seemed to be none. But then a friend of mine announced that he was going to work for an organisation called Teen Challenge, which was the same organisation that Hayley had been working with. It would actually turn out that the men's centre in London was relocating to Norwich and was going to be run by no other than a gentleman that gave me the prophetic word to keep my eyes focused on Jesus. Could this have been a coincidence? I didn't think so. There was over 1,000 people in my old church in Norwich and thought this had to be God. It would turn out that also that my dad was friends with one of Hayley's friends, and the connections kept coming. Another friend of Hayley's from Scotland was a friend of mine. I never discussed any of these things with Hayley, and I kept the best I could to myself. But as I was planning another trip to North Wales, Hayley suggested maybe I should visit South Wales instead. I agreed, obviously, because God certainly seemed to be talking to me, and I was a little bit curious. But I needed absolute confirmation from the Lord, because I didn't want to end up in another repeat of history, and truly believed I needed to keep my eyes focused on him in this season. So I put out my Gideon's fleece. I asked the Lord, if and when it's right, and Hayley and I should meet, Hayley should be wearing a red coat. Bit of a strange request. Well, a week before going to South Wales, I was visiting my mum. And whilst I was speaking to my mum, she was asking where was I going in North Wales. And I had to correct her and say, well, actually, I'm going to South Wales. And she was a little bit confused as to why I was going to South Wales. And as I'm saying this to her, on her television in the background, someone held up a red coat, which obviously made me laugh, knowing what I'd said to the Lord. So then I had to say to her, well, actually, Mum, I've met someone, and I've asked God if there's to be more than a friendship here. And one of the Gideon's fleece that I've asked for is a red coat. And it was just shown on the television, so it made me laugh. In her panic, I had to tell her to calm down, because I was just clarifying to my mum that it's okay. That wasn't Hayley's coat, but and she was like, well, of course not. You know, that's Hayley's coat off the TV programme. So it turned out that there'd been a 2-3 week storyline about Hayley's missing red coat, and my mum didn't know that Hayley's name was Hayley. So my mum was convinced right there that we were getting married. I wasn't so sure. Well, a week later I visited South Wales for the first time, and the weekend was pretty insane, to be fair. We had a random guy walk past us. We'd been walking up the mountain, and we'd just returned to the car, and as we sat in the car, this gentleman knocked on the window. He said, as you both walked past me, the Lord dropped a scripture in my heart. When two people come together and call upon the Lord, he will answer. And this was a complete stranger. Hayley doesn't know him, I don't know him. And how did he even know we were Christians? The following day, I attended Hayley's church, and there was a visiting speaker from America, Sonny Mazar. Now, he prayed for individuals at the end of the meeting, and when it was my turn for prayer, he started to prophesy over me that the Lord is going to raise me up as a pillar in the house. And this was a great shock to the elders of the church who hadn't yet met me. Well, the weekend came to a close, but I still wasn't sure. A couple of months passed, we carried on talking, and I decided to visit again. And on my second trip, upon my arrival, Hayley would say, "I've had a great bargain today." She'd go on to say that she owns a lot of coats, but she had never owned a red coat before, to which she reveals his red coat. Hayley didn't obviously know of my red coat, Gideon fleece. So after leaving that weekend, I said to the Lord, I believed that he was confirming a relationship here, and because it was still 2022, I prayed to him saying that when the time is right, Hayley will confess to me that the Lord had been speaking to her similarly to how God had spoken to me.
When I was listening to that, I just thought, how many times do we need God to confirm and confirm and confirm and confirm? You know, we're just like, just one more sign, Lord. So obviously I'd been on my own for many years, 17 years, and I was really struggling to let down my guard and let anybody in because I was just terrified of making the wrong decision. And thankfully to my pastor Andrew, I know you all know Andrew and Helen here. Andrew, you know, sat down one day and was just chatting to me and saying, "Come on, Hale." I think he was saying, "I think the Lord said enough," you know? And he gave me that little nudge. And as he did, in my heart, I said, I'm going to go for it with Colin. And instantly, it was like all of that fear and everything else just disappeared. And so it was over Christmas period, and I'd messaged Colin to say, you know, are you busy over Christmas? And he said he wasn't. So he came down for another visit. And basically, we sat together and shared with one another about how God had spoken to each one of us. And one of the things which was quite profound really is that as we started to talk about these things, I'd remembered a morning which was kind of the previous year. And I was driving, this had never happened to me before, and I was driving to work in the morning and I was just praying in tongues. I was just praying in tongues and just interceding and just, coming before the Lord on my way to work. And all of a sudden, the Holy Spirit fell on me in my car, and I started to cry out for a husband that I'd never met. I remember just praying and crying because I felt like I could feel that he was in pain and that he needed God to step in and to meet with him and to heal him. And when we traced back that moment and we looked back to when Colin was, going to take his own life, we could see that God was putting the prayer of intercession on me for him. Incredible when you think about it. So in that, that night where we confessed all to one another, Colin said the famous phrase, "Looks like we're getting married then." So in January, we got engaged, and then by August, we were married. And the rest is history. Now, I've inherited a stepson who's 16. And we've just had a baby boy who's 16 months old, Joshua John. And we've bought a house together, and we are now serving in Oakland's church together as apostolic deacons, helping to support the work there and also to come along and support our family churches. And so, yeah. Is there anything else you want to say? Is that it? Yeah? Is that good? Thank you. Thank you. So, just on the back of obviously what we've shared this morning, I know it's quite a lot, and obviously me and Colin come from such different backgrounds, and yet we've both known what it is to be in a place of need and desperation. And I just, want to ask if there is anybody here today, and maybe, Maybe you need God to intervene in a situation in your life. Maybe you are a church goer. Maybe you've gone to church for years, but there's still some area that you need God to break through in. I believe that God is here to do miracles today. I believe that's wherever his presence is. There is life. There is miracle working power. The blood of Jesus is here to transform and to save. And so if that is you and you do need a touch from the Lord today, then we'd be happy to pray for you. We'd be happy to minister to you. And if there's anybody here today and you don't know Jesus, maybe you've been like Colin, who, was kind of like, well, maybe there is something, but I'm not sure, if it's Jesus or if it's God. Maybe today you've been brought closer to the realization and the revelation that Jesus is Lord. He is the only way to the Father. He is God, the Son of God, who came into the world to set us free from the sin that so binds us up that we can't be free. We can't be free in our minds, our hearts, our spirits, unless the Lord comes. That sign says there, where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom. And maybe you want to know that freedom today, and maybe you want to know Jesus as your Lord. Then I want to give you the opportunity too to be ministered to. And so I don't know how you do that here, Steve. Do you have people coming forward to receive? I think maybe we'll do that. I don't know if you want to play a worship song and let people feel less self-conscious. But if you want to be prayed for, or if you want to give your life to Jesus, then we invite you just to come forward, and myself and Colin and the team here, the prayer ministry team and Steve, will be happy to pray for you. Okay, God bless.